Welcome back. I'm Pat, that Halloween movie collector, and I'm back with another That 70's movie review. And as you probably noticed from the past few that I've done, I'm pretty much going right down the line from some of my favorites. So this one's going to be no exception this week. I'll be reviewing Black Christmas from 1974, starring the great Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Lynn Griffin, John Saxon, the late great Margot Kidder, Douglas McGrath, and Andrea Martin. Written by A. Roy Moore and produced and directed by the late great Bob Clark. Now, this movie, simple story. Group of girls living in a sorority house right around Christmas time, just probably about a week or so before Christmas, are stalked by a killer and picked off one by one. Easy concept. Also, somewhere along the line, it influenced my beloved Halloween. But this is a fun movie, a fun watch. If you've never seen the original from '74, you don't know what you're missing. Go check it out. The two remakes, the 2006 remake was okay. The 2019, complete and utter garbage. It's shit. But we're not going down that road. We're not worried about the remakes. So here we have somebody just basically called Billy, who you see the beginning of the movie. He just shows up at this house. The sorority house is all decorated for Christmas, and they're having a little bit of a Christmas party before people start leaving to go home for Christmas. And he finds a trellis on the side of the house, and he climbs up, and he finds his way into the attic. And now he camps out in the attic pretty much for the whole movie. And little by little, he'll make his way down and take them all out. Well, all but one, which is pretty much arguably the first final girl, in Olivia Hussey, as Jess Bradford. That is her name in the film. So, party is winding down. They get their first phone call from Billy, and it's just nasty, like he's just out of his mind, saying just real nasty shit to them, and they're like shocked, and they're all sitting there listening to it. And the one phone call, Margot Kidder actually picks up the phone and starts yelling back at him. And right at the end, like in a real creepy voice, he just says, "I'm going to kill you," and just hangs up.
You fucking creep!
I'm going to kill you.
That one always gave me goosebumps. Just the way he just changed from that whole psychotic rant and just said, "I'm going to kill you," and just hangs up. So soon you have girl Claire, played by Lynn Griffith, who is going upstairs to pack and leave. And she, unfortunately, is our first victim. She hears some rustling around in the closet, and she's got some clothes hanging, like I guess some dry cleaning, got the plastic over it, and she sees something, and she hears something. She's thinking it's the cat, Claude, belonging to the house mother, Mrs. Mack. So she's yelling, "Claude, is that you?" And then she's looking, and slowly, and it's a real long POV shot, and then she gets in there, and then just as she realizes somebody's there, he comes and grabs her and he suffocates her with the plastic. Now, this creates that iconic image, which has been on the cover of the VHS for ages, and it's just on the poster. He takes her up into the attic, and then you see her, and she's covered in plastic, suffocated, sitting in that rocking chair. And she'll stay in that rocking chair pretty much for all eternity, because even by the end of this film, they don't find her. So she's still up there. So now flash to the next morning, and you see Claire's father, and he's there at the college to pick her up and bring her home for Christmas. So he's standing and waiting, and here she is. She's late. She hasn't shown up. So she sees, of course, some asshole kids throw a snowball at him, hit him in the face, and the guy that's taking care of the kids comes over and says, "Oh, I apologize." And so he says, "I'm looking for my daughter. She's a half hour late. Can you tell me where," or he asked, "Do you know?" Says, "Do you know Claire Harrison?" And she belongs to the sorority. And he says, "Oh yeah, I know. They're over that morning. They were doing like a breakfast and pictures with Santa for underprivileged kids." So he says she might be over there, but he didn't see her. So if anything, she'd be back at their sorority house. So he tells him how to get to the sorority house. So he goes to the sorority house, meets Mrs. Mack, and he's saying, "I haven't seen her since last night." They go up into her room, and they see her stuff's there, but they don't know where she is. So, of course, they become concerned. The other sorority girls find out. They go to the police station and file a report eventually. Now, there's a whole other backstory going on with this, in the fact that Jess finds out she's pregnant with her boyfriend Peter. So eventually she goes, her boyfriend is an aspiring musician. He's got this big audition, so he's been working on that. And she's a little bit on the outs with him, where she's I think she kind of wants to make a break of it. So she goes over to the auditorium where he's practicing, and she tells him, I'm pregnant. And he's like, thinking that he would be scared or whatever, but he's happy. He's like, no, this is great. But she wants to get rid of it. She wants to have an abortion. Now, 1974, this was a big deal to be putting this type of social commentary in there. A college girl getting pregnant, wanting to have an abortion. This is a couple of years before the big abortion talk on the TV show Maude, which was pretty big at the time. And they get into a bit of a fight because he's pissed, because he's like, don't I have any say in this? Because I'm the father. And of course, she's like, I don't want this baby. And basically doesn't want to be with him either. So he gets pissed and says, I'll come by tonight and we'll talk more about it. And she's like, well, there's really no reason to. You're not going to change my mind. But he says, I'm coming over anyway. So that's the other backstory that's going along with this. And it'll play into this a little bit. Peter's going to play a bigger part much later on. So later that morning, Barb and Phil and Mr. Harrison go, like I mentioned, they both go to this police station, talk to Sergeant Nash to file a missing persons report. And he's kind of a dick. Sergeant Nash. Douglas McGrath, he played one of the, Bob Clark also is very varied, not to go off topic. I mean, he did a horror movie, a Christmas horror movie, 1974's Black Christmas. He did 1980's, I believe it's 1980, A Christmas Story, another Christmas movie, which is a beloved family movie. And then a few years later, he does Porky's. So he is all over the spectrum. And Douglas, I'm bringing him Douglas McGrath up because if you remember the scene in Porky's with the two gym teachers, one whose name is escaping me, and Douglas McGrath plays the one gym teacher, and they're staring at the girl. He's like, oh, just tell her to call her Lassie. Lassie, played by Kim Cattrall. So he's trying to get with her, and he keeps saying, just get her upstairs into the equipment room. And he's like, why do they keep calling her Lassie? Why do you call her Lassie? So eventually, if you've seen the scene where eventually they go up into the equipment room, and he starts banging Kim Cattrall, and she starts screaming, and this guy, Doug McGrath, he's there just hysterical laughing. It's just an iconic scene. I had to bring it up. That's I guess that's why Bob Clark brought him back, because he was in 1974's Black Christmas. But, okay, so we'll go back to this. A little side note there. So now they're talking to Sergeant Nash, Douglas McGrath, and he's being a dick. He's like, oh, she probably just ran off with her boyfriend, and they're giving it back. Like Margot Kidder's being a little snotty to him too, and he's like, would you shut up and stop? He's like, they're going back and forth. So he says, just leave me a number and I'll call. So she says like fellatio 555, whatever the number is. I don't remember off the top of my head. So back in the day, area codes were they used different locations. Usually like different boroughs would have it, like, there's, especially in New York and other places. So she makes this fake one up called fellatio. And he's like, what's this? And she's like, oh, it's a new exchange. It just came out.
Fellatio. It's a new exchange. F-E.
It's a new one on me. How do you spell it?
Capital F-E, little L, L-A-T-I-O.
Thanks.
Don't mention it.
So just to stick it to him because he's such an asshole. So they go off after filing this report. Jess goes to visit Chris Hayden, who is Claire's boyfriend. And he must be on the hockey team because it's Canada. So she visits him and says, what happened? And she's like, what do you mean? Well, I haven't talked to her since last night. And she, when I said goodbye to her, and says how her father went in to file a report with Barb and Phil, and they just completely treated him like shit and just totally disregarded what was going on. So he's like, who was it? So apparently he must know all the police officers because he came in with them and started giving him shit. And then that's when John Saxon comes out. He plays Lieutenant Fuller, and he knows Chris, and he's telling him, and he's like, well, why isn't Nash taking this seriously? And with this, they also filed a report of the obscene phone calls they're getting. So John Saxon's giving it to Nash, saying, you have a complaint of these obscene phone calls at the one address, and then you get a missing persons report at the same address. And he's like, why aren't you taking this seriously? So he takes it over, and he starts to investigate it. And meanwhile, there's another woman who files a report that her daughter's been missing. So now they go out and do this whole search party at this park to try to find the little girl, and everybody takes part just because they don't know what's going on. It could also be Claire. Unfortunately, they do find the young girl dead. And you never understand, it's never mentioned if Billy did it, but I guess you're just meant to assume that Billy did it. Not really sure. That was a little left ambiguous. Claire's father runs over and, of course, sees that it's not her, but it's this little girl, and now this poor woman finds out her daughter's been killed, and they're still on the hunt, saying, okay, well, now we still got to keep looking because now we can't find Claire because that wasn't Claire. Meanwhile, while they're all out, Mrs. Mack is at home. She's getting ready to go to her sister's house for Christmas, and so she's the only person in the house, and she's home alone. So, and she hears the cat meowing, her cat Claude, so she's calling for Claude, but Claude was up in the attic now. So I'm assuming Billy brought him up there because I don't know any other way that the cat would have got up there. So she hears it, so she goes up into the attic. And just as she turns and sees Claire sitting in the rocking chair, and she's shocked, she just happens to turn her head, and there's Billy. He's got like a big, like a big pulley. I don't know what the hell a big pulley's doing up in the attic. Like this big-ass pulley. Throws it, hits Mrs. Mack, and kills her. And so she gets pulled up into the attic, so now she's gone. Peter comes, and you can see he's agitated. And, of course, Lieutenant Fuller's like, well, who was that? And he's like, oh, it's my boyfriend. And, well, why is he's kind of suspicious the way he was acting. So that'll play into this a little bit later, too. He arranges for a phone operator to come and tap the phone so they can trace the call. So back in the day, that's what they had to do. They actually physically come and put a tap on the phone line. So he comes and investigates and looks around the house, John Saxon, and looks around the room. Nothing's really out of the ordinary. Asks who's in the house, about Mrs. Mack. And they're not suspecting anything about Mrs. Mack because she was supposed to leave and go to her sister, so they just assume she left. So do you have a forwarding number? So they give a forwarding number for her if they need to speak to her. So it's all set up now that the phone's got a tap on it. And, of course, back in the day, you used to have to keep a person on for like 2 minutes for them to able to check it because like the old PBX machines, private branch exchanges, were huge, and you had to physically go and chase it, and you'll see it in the movie. Now, when the phone rings, it'll ring in the house, and it's also going to ring on Lieutenant Fuller's desk, John Saxon. Now, they removed the mouthpiece, so they won't hear anything when he picks up the phone, just so he can listen in to see who it is. So now they're all just hanging out at the house, and they're Barb goes off to sleep. She gets real drunk and gets real obnoxious when they're eating dinner with. Actually, this is now I'm jumping a little bit ahead. They're actually Mrs. Mack is still there. They're eating dinner before Barb goes upstairs before she leaves, and they go out because I forgot that Barb gets real drunk and they send her up to bed, and Billy eventually goes up there and kills her in one of the great scenes too. The Margaret Kidder where she has all these collectible glass figurines, and one is like a unicorn, and he stabs her to death with the unicorn. So that's a little bit earlier. That was before Mrs. Mack even left, or got killed, I should say. Not even left. So now you have just Phil and Jess in the house. So they're there, and of course they get a couple more phone calls and whatnot, and so they were all scared. So, and they get before this, the group of carolers. See, I know this movie so well, but I'm saying it a little bit out of order. So the group of carolers, it's actually a great scene where Barb gets killed, Margot Kidder. There's a group of carolers that come and they're singing, and Jess is there watching them sing, and that's when Billy comes and kills her. Totally distracted. You wouldn't hear anything because she's listening to them do their caroling, and that's when the woman comes and says, let's take all the kids home because of what's going on. They know the story of the little girl that was found killed, so they want everybody off the streets. So they're there. And they're in the house by themselves. Two men come that are just like neighborhood watchmen with shotguns to say, look, we're on patrol, looking around. whatnot. And meanwhile, there's also a police officer stationed in a car outside. Now, every time they get scared, they look and they see him sitting in the car. And unbeknownst to them, they'll find out later that he's laying there with his throat slit. Billy went out and killed him, but they're just thinking he's sitting in the car protecting them, but he's not. So Phil goes upstairs, and Phil, of course, ends up getting killed. So now she's home alone, and there was a few times that Billy did call, but he got off the phone too quick. And John Saxon's saying, we need, Jess, you got to do your best. I know it's hard, but we need like 2 minutes. We need that time. She's like, okay. So Phil goes upstairs and ends up getting killed by Billy. So now Jess is all home alone in the house and calls, and she actually manages to keep him on the phone long enough, and they actually get a trace. So they were out in the car at the time, and Lieutenant Fuller, and he calls Nash and says, look, as calmly as you can, because I'll kill you. I'll buck you down to Boy Scout. You need to call her and tell her to get quietly, put down the phone, and walk out the front door. Don't tell her why, because he doesn't want to surprise her, because the calls are coming from inside the house. Because when he called him and said, no, that's the house number, the phone number, John Saxon's saying, I think you have a mistake. He's like, no, the calls, that is the number. The calls are coming from inside the house, sir. So he's like, oh, shit. So they're wondering, so they're, I guess, across town, and they start racing over. So Nash calls and tries to explain to her, look, Jess, just get out of the house. And she's not understanding why. And then finally he just says, Nash, Jess, the calls are coming from inside the house. Walk out the front door, just get out. And that's when the shit hits the fan. Because that's when you see Jess go upstairs, and she finds both Barb and Phil dead in Barb's room. So she looks and she hears Billy saying, it's me, Agnes, don't tell him what we did. So he starts whispering, and that's when you see the eye through the doorway. This is the great chase scene where he's chasing Jess Bradford. Chases her into the basement. She locks herself in the basement. And while she's in the basement, who shows up but Peter? Peter comes from outside, and he's knocking on a window, and he's like, Jess, what are you doing in there? Why are you there? And he breaks the window and comes down and checks on her. And meanwhile, she has a weapon, the fire poker, and you don't see what happens. You just see the aftermath. You hear a scream, and just as the police are getting down there, you see her on the floor. She's still alive, and Peter's covered in blood. So you assumed she killed him. Now, this all seems all well and good, because then they assume it's him that was killing everybody. They're going to find a backstory about it being pregnant, because he's talking on the phone, because he does make a phone call, and Lieutenant Fuller is listening and says, Jess, what was that all about? So she kind of says what's going on. So they put two and two together, thinking it was him that was doing this all the time, because he lost his mind about the baby, and he was under stress from this audition. So now, Jess is laying in the house, they're laid out, trying to get her some sleep. The father, Mr. Harrison, passes out, because probably from exhaustion and not eating. And here it is, the end of the night. They still don't know where she is, because they still have not gone up to the attic. So they have not found Mrs. Mack's body up there, and they did not find Claire yet. They've found Phil and Barb. That's it. So they're still up in the attic. So while Jess is there, great POV shot, which you'll see a lot of them in My Beloved Halloween, that pans through the house and basically out, and then it pans to the front of the house, and there's a police officer at the front door just guarding, and it just pans away, and all of a sudden you start hearing the phone ring again. And that's just how it ends. Now, that's such a great ambiguous ending to this, where, because you don't know why he's doing it, you don't know who he is, where he came from, never see him, and he's never caught. How great is that? Just such a great, you have to leave it to your imagination. Did he come down and kill her? Who knows? Now, of course, they did remakes, but there's no direct sequel. So any YouTubers like myself, or follow like a lot of the different channels, if you follow Dave McRae, who's got a great channel, he actually did a direct sequel, fan film, It's Me, Billy, and he's actually doing an Indiegogo right now for It's Me, Billy Chapter 2. So Go check it out. I pledged money because I love Black Christmas. So I got if you pledged, I forget how much it was, you got a snow globe made by Lynn Griffith and signed, which is Claire. And if they raise the money, which it looks like they're going to, Lynn Griffiths is going to come back as Claire's sister, and he's actually got Olivia Hussey, the original Jess Bradford, on board. So I'm looking forward to this because he did a great job with it, It's Me, Billy. So side note on that. So that's basically the whole story of the movie. Now, this was groundbreaking because it did influence a lot of horror movies. Jess Bradford is arguably the first final girl, and she was fantastic in it. The way it was shot, the eerie atmosphere, the POV would influence tons of horror movies. Of course, Halloween, it was a big influence on John Carpenter when he did Halloween. He admitted it. And it's just one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I watch it every Christmas, several times, even once or twice during the year. I'll watch it too because it's an entertaining movie to watch. It's got a little hint of comedy here and there, and it's got such a really creepy and eerie atmosphere. You feel for her. Now, the whole concept of obscene, scary phone calls, you could argue, oh, well, when the stranger calls. No, this was 74. Stranger Calls was what, 79? So there you go. That was 5 years before that. And somebody did, was it Bob Clark to put out a little short story or short movie with somebody calling with obscene phone calls? I have to look that up. I think it was. I can't remember the name, but it was a big influence on When a Stranger Calls. So that is my review, my ranking of Black Christmas 1974. Now, with the Dead 70s movies, I give a ranking from 1 to 5. And this movie, yeah, I'm going to rank it pretty high because it's right up there in the top 5 with me with Halloween. So I'm giving this movie a solid 4.5 smiley faces. So, yeah, I'm ranking it high because, like I said, I'm going right down my favorite 70s movies list with these rankings. Eventually, it's going to shy off. And I'm going to review a couple movies that I didn't really care for because I don't want to make it seem like, oh, every movie I'm reviewing I love. There's plenty of movies I don't like, so I'll break a few of those out just to break up the mix. So that is my ranking, my review of Black Christmas 1974. If you haven't seen it, you don't know what you're missing. Go watch this movie. It's a great watch. You can watch it any time of the year. It's so much more fun to watch, obviously, during Christmas time. Like down here, I have a fireplace. I'll put the fireplace on, the Christmas tree, and sit and lose myself in my little Black Christmas world, and it's just a lot of fun. So go check it out. It's worth watching. So hope you enjoyed the review. Hope you enjoyed the other reviews I've been doing. I got a bunch more lined up. There's a bunch of different content on this channel. Make sure you like this video. It helps people find this channel. Some like-minded people that like horror, comedy, music, Halloween, collectibles, all that happy horse shit. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Helps us out. Doesn't cost nothing. Check out some of the other content. All the links to everything are down here below. If you're a collectible person here, if you're a big Kiss fan, if you love Halloween, that's me. It's all about Halloween. Make sure you check out our horror movie podcast. That horror movie podcast every Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Every Tuesday night, we do a watch-along of a movie on that live movie watch-along. We did Black Christmas. Did we do Black Christmas? I don't think we did Black Christmas this year. We did it last year on our old podcast, but probably every December, the watch-alongs are all horror movies, Christmas horror movies. So, and if you're into Christmas horror movies, make sure you check out my ranking of my top 5 Christmas horror movies, top 5 Killer Santas, all this crazy shit's here. So, if you have a minute and you're bored at work, you're bored at home, you run out of beer, you run out of alcohol, and you got nothing else to do, check out the content, see if you like it. And until then, I'll talk to you soon.